With these videos, I've started to develop my rating system and what I'm calling the different conclusions that I come up with. And the lowest rating that I've come up with is the phrase, "not worth the pulp it's printed on." I picked that one very specifically because I know that a lot of the fiction that I love when it was first produced, including H.P. Lovecraft, was considered pulp. And that was a derogatory term, referencing the paper, the cheap paper that these stories were printed on, and pulp became a shorthand for not very good. I wanted to make my lowest score that because even though I may not like it now, I know that, in 90 years from now, someone might love it. Hello, and welcome to the Eldritch collection. My name is Aaron Peterson, and I'll be your curator. This week, we're talking about The Void, and this is a film that has challenged me a lot. The challenge primarily comes from the fact that a lot of people have told me that The Void is one of the best examples of Eldritch horror or cosmic horror or Lovecraftian horror put to film. But at the same time, it's also one of my least favorite films that I've watched. The film was produced in 2017. The film has two directors, Jeremy Gillespie and Stephen Kazansky. I apologize if I pronounced that incorrectly. It stars Aaron Poole, Kenneth Welsh, Daniel Fathers, and Kathleen Monroe. They all seem to have done a very good job with the material that they're given and the schedule they were working with. When I first saw the film, I was under the impression that it was perhaps not a big budget, but an average budget, B horror film, somewhere in the several $1 million budget range, that kind of had some no-name actors to just get it off the door, and it was just sort of, here it is. It wasn't until my second viewing, when I watched it with the director's commentary, that I realized that this film was actually crowdfunded by GoFundMe, and it had a budget of around $100,000. This colors a lot of my understanding and, the nuance that I'm trying to bring to this video, because the first time I watched it, I'm just going to be honest, I hated it. I thought the dialogue was campy, I thought the effects were, needlessly gross, and also sort of, kind of distracting from the story to a certain extent. I thought the story in general didn't make sense, and while some of the imagery was captivating and interesting, it didn't really explain anything. And I don't necessarily need to know the full encyclopedia of this world, but if you look at a Lovecraft film, you know what's going on, why one character goes from here to here to here. But with this film, there seems to be a disconnect that happens, especially at the end of the film, and I'm trying not to spoil it, but it just seems like he's at this one place, and then he's at this other place, and then he's at this third place, and there seems to be very little continuity or explanation as to what, led him there. There's also the motivation of the monsters, and while, the motivation of most of the monsters in Lovecraft's work don't really make sense necessarily, there seems to be some sort of, more animalistic or instinctual way that they act, and in this film, they're just either kind of zombies or kind of, weird, cult leaders, and it's not really clear. And because of all those reasons, I just really couldn't get into this film. I found myself laughing or rolling my eyes or just getting bored, and all of those things do not necessarily make a very good Eldritch horror, cosmic horror film. But like I said, once I found out the budget for the film, and after I listened to the commentary and learned about all of the struggles that these directors had while producing this film, I'm surprised it was as good as it is. They kept losing their locations because of a previous movie that filmed in those locations that burned the owners, so they had to change almost all of their shots because of that. Their schedule got pushed back into winter, which of course complicated things. There was also a whole bunch of other budget constraints that affected their schedule, that affected their lack of ability to create overtime, and all of this just made for what sounded like a miserable shooting schedule and production. It seems that a lot of the cohesion of the film that was successful came from the fact that they spent so much time in After Effects cleaning up shots, adjusting shots, matching cuts and those sort of things. And the editing work is something that, should be praised, because apparently it could have been a lot worse, and they put a lot of work and a lot of love into it, and now that I know that, it shows. Now, for the people that tell me that it's one of the best examples for Lovecraftian horror, I see what you're saying. It seems to be the most overtly Lovecraftian. There's a cult, there's another dimension, there's plenty of tentacles, there's plenty of dread, there's plenty of terrible things that happen to innocent people, and there's no real explanation as to why, or their ultimate fate, or the machinations that go on beyond it. If you take Lovecraft and you take this film and you hold them out and you squint, they're basically identical. It captures a lot of the hallmarks of it, the genre tropes of it. But that feeling, that cosmic horror feeling that I reference a lot, and there seems to be a lack of that in this film because of either the production and the story's quality kind of took me out of it, and I couldn't get that feeling, that catharsis, that dread, or because I don't know. It's just because it just seemed like a parade of like Cthulhu fan illustrations as opposed to a story set in a mysterious universe. And that was disappointing because it could have been so much better, because I liked where they were going with the film. I liked a lot of the early shots and a lot of the early atmosphere that they created, but they either didn't have the time, they didn't have the budget, or they didn't have the actors, or they didn't have the script to really bring it home. This is a great 80s monster horror, gore, silly horror movie. Night of the Living Dead, a lot of John Carpenter stuff kind of has this vibe, and it's much more of that sort of slasher monster movie horror film to me than it is a cosmic horror film, because the questions weren't being asked. It was just kind of a parade of tentacles and gore and blood. So let me just boil it down into the simple pros, cons, and who's it for. Pros, the visuals, the makeup, the blood effects, the atmosphere that they're able to create, and the creativity that they have in a lot of the shots is there. It's interesting, it's memorable, and I do appreciate it even if it didn't land narratively all the time. Also, the actors, to an extent, did really well with the material that they were given and the time that they were given. I think that they took it seriously. You could tell that they were taking it seriously, and they really did give it their all and really lived in the moment that these directors and storytellers were trying to create. The cons, like I said, the story didn't have a structure I could follow. Dialogue could be pretty campy, could be pretty stilted, and I found myself laughing at it more than appreciating it or buying it. As far as who this film is for, it would be anybody who likes kind of more 80s monster flicks or kind of grindhouse, Pulp Fiction, over-the-top, zany, bloody, gory horror films. This film is not really for someone like me who's admittedly a bit of a film snob and someone who likes more nuanced and thoughtful horror. This is not that. As far as the grade for this film, I'm going to say it's not worth the pulp that it's printed on. But it has some kernels in there, and as these directors progress, or as time wears on, maybe this film will be remembered as something much more than the sum of its parts. I've been especially harsh on this film. I can just sort of feel myself getting tense because of it, because I know that a lot of people like it, and when a lot of people like something and I see things about it that I do like, I want to like it so bad, and I just couldn't. And that being said, I hope these directors continue to go forward and make great movies. I think that they have a lot of wonderful ideas, and they have a great way of seeing things, especially when it comes to monsters and creature design. And I really hope that they continue their career. And I really hope that if they see this by some chance, that they know that I hear you and I'm sorry that your production was so rushed and so stressful. But please don't stop just because I, didn't quite get it. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next week.